All right, we are officially on the record. The recording is going. So welcome everyone to the class. This is MCM 1401, Aesthetics and Theory of Communication. And this class should be interesting. I find that most of my students come into the class not really knowing what to expect. What is this class really going to be all about? And so I want to give just an introduction. This might be the first class that you're in that starts getting into some actual media creation. But we're really not focusing this month on a specific discipline of media creation. So it's not dedicated to video. It's not dedicated to web design or graphic design in particular. But we're going to look at ideas that can really apply across the board. So it's very neutral as far as media goes. My hope is that you'll walk away from the class really with more of a critical eye for how media is put together and why certain decisions are made, why certain color schemes are used, or why a particular image was picked, and so forth. In terms of how the viewer will react. And this is very much a foundations course. So the stuff that you take away from this class, much like your new media tools and your introduction to media communications classes, it's setting a foundation that later courses will leverage and draw upon and build upon. So you'll see these topics come up again down the road. You'll see some of the work that you do this month be referred to again in graphic design and other classes dealing with visual media. Okay, so let me ask you guys, when you hear the word aesthetics, what comes to mind? What is that? How do you hear that word used?
I think about like a visual representation of what something looked like on the surface or something like that, I guess.
Okay, so the look, like Micah says as well, the way something looks. And are there any other thoughts? Any other definitions that you've heard, or other ways you've heard that word used?
I haven't.
No? Okay. The feel of something. Okay. And it's kind of used in a lot of different ways depending on how formal the conversation is. It's sometimes you hear it tossed around in casual conversation as referring to a particular style or look, like you were saying, like it's like the Southwestern aesthetic of the vase that's on the screen now. Sometimes you'll hear the phrase that something being referred to as aesthetically pleasing, so it means it has an attractive look to it, and that's actually getting more back into the roots of what aesthetics is. Aesthetics started as a branch of philosophy, particularly dealing with art, and it was all about exploring what makes something beautiful and why people find different things beautiful. The two pieces of art I have on this slide are from artists that are considered to be great artists in the history of Western art. That's a Jackson Pollock on the left and a Monet on the right. And you see, obviously, there's a lot of variation in what people consider great art and what people might be attracted to. The Monet is still somewhat abstract in that it's impressionistic, so there's not fine details, but it's more universally appealing, perhaps, whereas Jackson Pollock was highly abstract, with a lot of drizzled colors and random patterns. So there's a lot of subjective value in there, right? So looking at this from the perspective of us as modern media professionals, that's a little too variable. We need something that we can measure and control and plan for. And this is where we come to the more modern idea of applied media aesthetics. And let me flip back really quick and notice in this definition, this original aesthetics of art philosophy definition, the focus is on appreciating and creating beauty, specifically beauty. Now compare that to this more recent idea of media aesthetics, a process in which we examine a number of media elements, how they interact, and our perceptual reactions to them. What's the fundamental change that's happened there?
There's not really, I guess, a painting or some type of drawing or anything like that. It's more of like just elements being placed to make up a composition, I guess.
And also looking at the reactions. Previously, aesthetics was looking specifically at what we find beautiful. Now we're looking at perceptual reactions in the broad spectrum. So that doesn't necessarily mean beauty. It doesn't even necessarily mean something positive or pleasant. It might be an unpleasant perceptual reaction. We might find something frightening or something appalling and repulsive. But sometimes those reactions are what we're going for. I mean, think about TV programs or even commercials and advertisements. There's plenty of advertisements that, or public service announcements that really want to tug at your heartstrings to make you feel sad or empathic for a person. Or one I always mention are the commercials with the Sarah McLachlan music showing the dogs in the animal shelters. That's not. I mean, some people might find it beautiful in a very sad way, but the goal is to make you feel empathy for those animals. And so that's what we're really looking at. This is much more defined, a lot less subjective. So we're talking about how do media elements combine to support each other in creating these perceptions. When I talk about media elements, what we're talking about are all the little pieces that go into creating a piece of media. That might be an image, the choice of subject matter, the choice of imagery, the choice of colors, the style of the typography used, even the way in which you capture your subject. Are you looking at them in extreme close-up? Are you looking at them from farther away or from below or above? These will all change how that subject is perceived. And all those things add up. We'll look at color later on and look at it in a way that's where it's almost like a musical score that just accentuates what's being shown and influences perceptions. So these are the things we're talking about, these little pieces, these building blocks that go into media creation. Yeah, and Micah mentioned the Dove campaign where they had, trying to show women's, inner beauty and change their perceptions of themselves. So that's a really good example. Okay, so yeah, perceptual reactions. Think about what perceptual reactions that term means. Our perceptions are how we respond to what we sense with our sensory organs. So so that includes emotional responses, and attitudes, and our previous experience with those subjects. Okay, so here's the breakdown, and this is my very overly complicated diagram of this class. It's actually not as complex as it seems, but if you look at this in vertical columns, this is what we're going to be studying this month. In week 1, you have 3 activities: an exploration, starting off looking at visual storytelling, which is a continuation of the storytelling lessons that you had in New Media Tools, now focusing specifically on visual aspects. On Thursday, you'll have a Photoshop practice. And each week you'll have a Photoshop practice dealing with different Photoshop techniques. And that's going to be our design tool for the month. It's a way of introducing you to the software and allowing you to practice some of the ideas we're dealing with. And then the big project for the week is the mood board project. And I'll get into specifically what that's all about in a minute, because not everybody has heard of a mood board, but that's something we're going to be building throughout the weeks. Week 2, our focus for the exploration is color theory and color psychology, which are 2 different topics. Again, you'll do a Photoshop activity dealing with color manipulation in Photoshop. And then you'll do another segment of your mood board. Again, I'm going to get into the details of that next up. Week 3, exploring typography as well as what's called visual hierarchy. And that's a principle of composition, so a way you can direct your viewer's attention. Again, more Photoshop, now getting into some more, a little bit more advanced photo compositing and layer masks and things of that sort. And the last part of your mood board. So how this is all going to wrap up is all these ideas from the exploration, all these techniques you've practiced with Photoshop are going to come together in a final design project that's based on planning and brainstorming you've done with your mood board. So it all converges there in week 4. Okay, who's heard of a mood board?
I have.
You have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are you able to describe what they are and what their purpose is?
Well, from what I understand, I think I had my sister and her friend actually created one, and I think it was like they found different elements of how they felt about certain things, and they kind of like compiled everything and put it onto a different board, something like that. Maybe not exactly, but something like that. They just found a lot of stuff that kind of like depicted their moods about certain things, about goals and different stuff like that, and they put it onto a board.
Okay, that sounds like a vision board, which is similar actually. It's sort of like a collage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a mood board is a collage, but it is one that is used as a way of visual brainstorming. This is something that started with actually interior designers, and what they would do is, it's kind of like how we use Pinterest, if you've ever used Pinterest, is collect ideas, things that inspire us, things that we like, a particular style or a particular texture or color scheme and so forth. And they just collect all these onto a collage. This is actually an example of a mood board. Usually it's focused on a specific project though. So if they wanted a particular look, they would collect different images that they thought were relevant to that particular project. This then was adopted by graphic designers and graphic artists, which is what this one is more focused on. So looking at this example, you can imagine this graphic artist obviously is looking to create something that has sort of a retro graphic art style. This looks like art from the 1960s. And they've just collected examples that spoke to them. So these aren't necessarily their own work, but things that they would want to emulate in some way. Like maybe they like the way this type, the wording looks on one of these, or the color scheme, or just the sort of rough cut design style. Just something spoke to them that related to the project they're currently working on. And so they just collect these images, and they collect color scheme that they think is relevant. And then in this case, they have typefaces as well. So it's sort of figuring out how they want the lettering to look, how they want the colors to look. And this is what we're going to do this month, except we're going to drag it out over the course of three weeks and do it in a very structured way. But you're going to be brainstorming a visual design that provides a visual expression of your personal mission statement. Now, I think you all wrote that back in Introduction to Media Communication. You may not remember the exact wording of your personal mission statement, but you probably remember the spirit of it and the major themes. So imagine to yourself, if your personal mission was a movie, what would the poster look like? Or, what would an advertisement look like in a magazine? That's what we're going to do this month. That's just going to be our way of applying the aesthetics principles that we're exploring and put it together in a way that is personal to you and gives you some subject matter that's very familiar to you to work with. Does that make sense? And I'm going to show you an example, so it'll be more clear. But does that part, at least the goal, make sense?
It does.
Okay. What's interesting also is that as you're doing this project, you're also not only creating this visualization of your mission statement, you're kind of planting the seeds of your personal brand, because you're going to be creating a color palette. You're going to be selecting typefaces and coming up with image themes that relate back to your personal mission, you as a media professional. So it's not necessarily set in stone, but you'll have an idea of how you want to represent yourself. And down the road, when you're in the graphic design class, Jacob will actually refer back to this and say, this is your time. You can apply that in creating personalized business cards and stationery using what we started this month. So let's take a look at what one of these looks like. We're using a specific template that I created for the class. So this is just a blank page that they've used. You can use almost anything for a mood board out in the real world. A lot of times things like Google Slides works well, or Google Drawing, because you can share them. And that's a big part of mood boards as well, is that they can be shared, because if you're working with a client, in this case, you're the client and the designer. So that makes it a little easier. But if you were working with a client and you wanted to show them your creative direction and get their buy-in before you spend time putting it all together, this is how you can do that. You can say, is this looking like what you had in mind? Is this suiting your needs and your vision? And they could say yes or no, and you can adjust your direction from there. You can also share this with teammates if you are working in a team environment. Say if you were a project manager and you had some graphic artists working with you and you wanted to convey your vision to them so then they can put it all together, that you can use a mood board. So using shareable tools like Google Documents is beneficial in that way. This month, though, just for the purpose of this assignment, we're going to use a pages template that I've put together that you will work on and then turn back into me through FSO. I will put feedback, put comments directly on your document, and then I'll give it back to you through FSO. And then you can look at my comments and make changes. And in fact, I will look back at the changes that you've made from week to week. And if you've corrected problems and worked out some issues, you can earn back some points on the previous week's assignment. And that's just a way that I handle this. My feeling is that learning is progressive. And if I just gave you a one-time judgment, it wouldn't be as deeply processed for you as if you could take my feedback and benefit from it in a real way. So that's just the way I handled this particular project. So you can earn back points. But looking at specifically what we're doing, each week you're going to fill in a different page of the mood board. Week 1 is the collage. So this is that collection of images. And along with that collage, you're going to give me a description, this design overview. And this is just a brief summary of how you envision your visualized personal mission statement coming together. What visual themes should it convey? What kind of emotional impact do you want it to have? How are you going to go about communicating that to your audience and so forth? So about a paragraph or two of the overview of where you want this to go. And then that should be represented in your images. So if you say, in this case, she wanted a feeling of authenticity, some themes of kind of standing on the edge, ready to leap into something new, taking risks. And so she collected these images of very aged natural wood that she felt kind of gave a sense of authenticity and realness. A lot of images of this person standing on a edge of a cliff. There's someone standing on the edge of the ocean and so forth, going on a journey. And even started getting into typefaces and color. How you organize this is up to you, but I do like to see some organization involved. Even if it's just giving me some notes, like including some notes saying what each image means to you, how it plays a part in your design or what have you. In this case, she actually categorized them into groups: textures, illustrations, color, design and typeface ideas, and so forth. And these little yellow blocks are actually her notes on each of these. So really highly organized and in a way that worked for her. So really free form though. So, but adding notes like that, and hopefully this is making sense, adding notes like this, going back to what I was saying about working with a team or working with a client, if you add your comments in here, then it makes it easier for them to understand what you're going for. If I just saw this wooden pier, I wouldn't really know why that was there. Maybe it's just you like the look of it. Maybe it's, I don't know, there's like a pier or a dock theme going on. But I probably wouldn't pick up on the idea of authenticity unless you communicated that. So when you put together your mood board from week to week, pretend that you're communicating to your design team, and I'll be playing the part of that other person. So communicate it to me in a way that I understand. So this is just week 1. You'll do this image collage and design concept. Week 2, once we cover color theory and color psychology, you'll build a color palette. And these are like your personal brand colors. So think about McDonald's has their golden arches. UPS has the brown and gold. What are some others? Coca-Cola is white and red or silver and red on the cans. And color is really integral to brand, and this is your own brand that you're developing. So your own brand colors. And you'll talk about why you chose those colors from a color theory standpoint. So just showing that you've got a good grasp of the ideas that we're covering that week. And these color codes, I don't want to get too deep into that now because that's week 2 stuff, but color codes are very important in media creation because they allow that color to be reproduced exactly. So if you gave this hexadecimal code to a graphic artist or a web designer, they could reproduce that magenta or kind of burgundy color precisely every time. There's no guessing. So those will be included as well. And the third week is typefaces. And you'll pick a couple of typefaces that represent, again, your personal brand. Think about some iconic typefaces. Disney has a very recognizable typeface. Coca-Cola does. I think the Harry Potter brand now has a pretty recognizable typeface. Again, just like color, the lettering is very recognizable. And so we'll talk about ideas of how you can pick typefaces for their mood and their style, and also how to pair different typefaces together to complement one another. So let's look back at her work. And we had her ideas for the images she wanted to the visuals that she wanted to use, the kind of imagery she wanted to use. She picked her color scheme, which was this burgundy, sort of a, not quite a periwinkle blue, but like a pale blue and a deeper blue and a gray. And picked some typefaces. And then at the end, remember, in week 4, all that comes together. And this is how that came together. She put this together in Photoshop. And she had some previous experience with Photoshop, so not expecting everyone to be artists, because this is really just an introduction to using Photoshop, but looking for all those things to be integrated together. So notice the colors. There's the burgundy, the blue, and the white. Maybe the pale blue kind of manifests in the water that has the sky reflected in it. You see that theme of the pier, the aged wood, and standing on the edge. So all those ideas came together in this final design. So that's what we're going for. And you have 4 weeks to brainstorm this and put it together. Does that make sense? Does it all seem clear?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, and again, we're using this template that I've put together for this assignment. If you use a mood board in the future, you can use whatever you want for it. In fact, you will use a mood board in the future in the web design course, and Emily Ray will give you a lot more freedom to come up with something that works for you. This is just allowing us to have a little more structure and consistency. Are there any questions? Anything I can clarify so far? Okay. Okay. And by the way, when we log in, I ask everyone to mute their mics just to avoid any background noise. But as we go through, if you do want to unmute and join the conversation, you can. You can also type in the chat area. Either one is fine. All right, so our first topic is visual story or visual storytelling. And you have explored some ideas of storytelling in your previous classes. Now we're really focused on visuals because this is a very visual class. So the idea is how to tell stories through the combination of imagery and words. And how do you tell a story when you only have one image, not a full motion picture or even a 30-second commercial? And it is that combination of an image, a compelling image with some simple message usually. It only takes a simple phrase to turn a picture into a story. And this example is one that illustrates that. This is a natural cavern with lots of interesting rock formations, but by itself is not really a story. It's not telling us a story. It could be awe-inspiring. It could be interesting to look at. But then you throw in that little caption that says, "Here I come, ready or not." Now there's a story. Now suddenly it's a game of hide and seek. And you're the person that is hiding in the cave because your perspective is from the cave. Somebody out there is about to come looking for you. So that's really what we're talking about is how do you turn something that isn't necessarily a story by itself into something deeper with deeper meaning just by adding simple words. You don't have to go into paragraphs explaining everything. The viewer's mind will create more meaning by themselves. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at the Linda videos on visual storytelling yet? Okay, Micah has, and it's about half an hour long, I think, maybe a little longer. That she goes into what makes a visual story. What were the two essential requirements for a story? Do you remember? That you must have in order to have a story at all. Okay, yeah, a protagonist. That's okay. And the second one was a story problem or a challenge. So looking back at this, who's the protagonist in this case? Probably you. Since you're the person hiding, you're the viewer that's hiding in the cave. The story problem is it's a game of hide and seek. Someone's coming to look for you. Simple as that, but it's a story. Some stories are more complex, like this one. What's going on here? Who's the protagonist in this case?
The man with the snowplow.
Okay, would it be the snowplow guy, or would it be the snowman himself who's the protagonist? Would maybe the snowplow be more of the antagonist who's coming after the
Yes, he would be. Yes, he would be. So the snowman would be the protagonist.
Yeah, and so it's almost sort of a horror movie situation in a very humorous way. He's hiding behind the tree from this snowplow that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And almost you don't even require words in this case. That it speaks for itself if you can interpret what's going on there. What's interesting, and we'll see more examples of this, is we are hardwired. Our brains are hardwired to recognize faces and expressions of emotion. They don't even have to be real faces or human faces. We'll still interpret emotion from them. And that's what you get with this scarecrow. That's not a whole lot of a face. It's just some buttons, a carrot, and kind of a dark impression for a mouth. But we still see his fear, right? His panic. Because we are wired to do that. And when we're little babies and we're first born, we learn how to express by imitating the adults around us, the parents, and that sticks with us. We don't necessarily go around imitating everyone, but we internalize what we see, and that is called empathy. That's we see an emotion expressed and we understand it, we feel it. So that's something that you will see leveraged again and again in visual stories in particular, is that use of empathy and interpretation of emotions to connect with your viewer. So How about this one? Who's the protagonist, first of all? And really look at all the different elements, the words, the pictures, and everything. Who is our main character who's experiencing this scenario?
The parent?
Okay. Yeah, I think you're on the right track there. It is the parent, and in this case, we are again put in the position of the parent. Because notice the little caption: decide if your child deserves them. So you came into this situation. This child has completely defaced the wall of your living room, which is bad. But then they've created this amazing reproduction of Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. So, on the other hand, that's pretty impressive. So do they deserve to be punished or rewarded? And that's the scenario they put us into. Micah, I saw your question. Does the protagonist have to be a person? It can be a thing, but really only if the thing is given human qualities. So if it's given a personality or given an identity. Sometimes you'll see that, like a car will be given a personality. It doesn't have to be cartoony with a face or anything, but just if there's an effort to make us feel like it has a personal identity. So just a regular inanimate object sitting there, not really a protagonist, but if it's something that we can then apply human feeling towards, yes. Another thing I want to point out, and I'm going to get more into this during our Photoshop lab on Thursday, is the arrangement of this picture. Who's heard of the rule of thirds?
I have.
Okay. And this is something that is used in photography. It's also used in videography and in video film composition. Okay, and Kristen uses it. Could you describe it briefly, Kristen? You can type or turn on your mic, either way. Okay, you break the picture into three. Right, three even, and that's vertically and horizontally, right? Much like you see here. This isn't entirely even. I was kind of eyeballing this, but right, making like a hashtag or a pound sign. And you see this in a lot of digital cameras, right? If you take a picture, you'll also notice it in Photoshop when you go to crop an image. It gives you a rule of thirds layout. Any thoughts on why that would be, why you would do that? What's the purpose? Okay, yeah, you want to put the main items, like your main focal points or your subject, where the lines connect. And if you look at this layout, it's not precisely placed on the intersections, but the girl is lined up with this left vertical third, and her face, which becomes our focal point, because remember we're geared to notice faces, is right there close to that intersection. It doesn't have to be precise. It's just a kind of a rough guideline. There you go. I guess the Dove commercial uses the rule of thirds a lot. There's a lot of different reasons. A lot of people will explain different reasons why you would apply the rule of thirds. Kind of the common explanation is just that it gives a more interesting composition. If you had everything centered right in the middle, it's very static. It's very just sort of a portrait. But if you offset it to that third, top, bottom, left, or right, and especially those intersection points, it gives you something a little more dramatic, right? It also allows you to see this subject, this girl, in the context of her environment. So now we can see her in the context of this living room, this wall, and the art that she's created. This isn't part of your exploration material, but I did want to comment on it, and I'm going to get into it more in the Photoshop lab, just to show how you can apply this, because it's something to start thinking about. You're going to explore this more formally in the graphic design course as well as the video courses, but just as an introduction. And some more personification or anthropomorphism, giving human qualities to non-human animals in this case. This one's pretty obvious. It's been photoshopped to give him sort of a little comb over. Poor cat is balding, and it's got the grumpy face. The little dog's a little less overt, but I can almost guarantee you this picture has been at least slightly photoshopped to give that pouty lip a little bit more poutiness and those eyes a little bit more feeling and a little bit more human quality. Because these designers know very well that expression of feeling will affect the viewers. And this, again, this is just a picture of a dog, but then add that to the slogan. He may be small, but you should see his heart. And now there's a little bit deeper meaning, even before you get into the fine print about shelter dogs. Notice some of the other symbolism here as well. That's not your typical dog pound, is it? That's prison bars. We see very clearly that poor dog is in jail, and so again, it's putting the dog in a human situation that we can understand and we can relate to and we can empathize with. So important factor. You use that empathy, leverage that. Thinking about perceptual reactions. How does Sarah McLachlan's ASPCA commercials really connect with you? It shows those sad faces and pairs that with sad music. Any thoughts so far? Questions or comments? Okay. So going back to the Linda video, what were some of the strategies that she described for engaging your audience and connecting with your audience through visual storytelling? Using something personal. And that they can relate to. Yeah, and that's pretty fundamental. That wasn't necessarily one that she named specifically, but as we've seen, making that emotional connection is essential. The kind of overarching umbrella term that she used to describe it is an intellectual challenge, something that gets their brains moving, and yeah, that pretty much is something, ties into something they can relate to. And those take the form of, a lot of times, of surprise, something that's surprising, either startling or humorous or just something unexpected. A lot of times now you see viral videos that have just the most absurd things happening, that just out of nowhere, and that's a mental challenge. It makes you say, what the heck did I just see? Humor is very, very effective. And think about I don't know if you guys still watch the Dollar Shave Club video in intro. I think it was intro, where he's just going through this, one after another of these bizarre situations. Poignancy, that's that emotional connection. That's could be something personal, but something that you feel, deep down in your heart for. Suspense is wanting to know what happens next. You're left with a cliffhanger. This, think about the scarecrow, or not the scarecrow, but the snowman. He's sort of a suspenseful moment, because is he going to escape from the snowplow, or is he going to be its next victim? We don't know. And symbolism and visual metaphor, these are very similar to one another. So using something that represents something deeper. This is a few of those different factors actually in this one. This is both surprise as well as humor. And in a way, it's a little bit of visual metaphor too. You see those dangerous jaws, those very sharp, pointy teeth, kind of jumping out at you. But then once we see the longer shot, and remember again, the distance of the shot, whether it's close up or a long shot, will play a big part, because now we see this little tiny dog that's not very threatening at all. What is the meaning of this whole thing? Danger is just a matter of distance, and it's all about, I think it's some kind of collision avoidance system that's in the VWs. But close up, it's dangerous. Farther away, not so much. Poor cat being interrogated. I'm noticing I have a lot of dog and cat examples. That was not intended, but there it is. I'm a cat person myself. So another absurd situation. You look at this and you're like, what, did the cat commit a crime? Which, if you know cats, is not out of the realm of possibility. But did your pet do something bad? You get pet insurance, and he's in the police interrogation room. All right, take a look at this one, and let me know your reaction once you've kind of examined it for a moment. Anybody have any observations or reactions to this image? Okay. Do you see the eyes looking out at you? Okay. It's kind of unexpected, isn't it? And then a little bit unsettling, maybe. Yeah, there are definitely two people back there. And looking closely, you might recognize them as children. And there's a lot of, this is actually very much a visual metaphor, very symbolic. The child's eyes looking from behind the fabric, the sweater fabric. And this is actually a comment on child labor in the textile industry. It says, find out what's behind the clothes you buy. in the very tiny print over here in the corner. But there's that feeling of first of surprise. Like you first notice those eyes. It's a little unsettling, and then there's that feeling of poignancy, that feeling of empathy, and you recognize what this is all about. Then you take in those feelings, you understand the message, and you feel the message. So more than just the cognitive understanding, it also gets the affective, the feeling involved, and that's when you really connect with your audience. Is when you can get them to feel something, not just think about something. If you can get both of those realms involved, then you're really getting somewhere. Okay, these are going to be pretty heavy now. You'll probably want to go back to the dog and cat pictures, but this one focuses more on the words as far as the visual hierarchy, what's really emphasized. What on earth? You see this. Why? I wish my son had cancer. Who would wish that ever? And you see the picture of the dad holding his son. Pretty moving, but also kind of confusing. It's a very strong and odd statement. And that's that mental challenge, that intellectual challenge. If you read the story, because they actually tell the story in this case, not just the visual story, the child has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is very rare, hasn't really been investigated or researched, and there's not really breakthrough treatment. Whereas if he had cancer, there's established treatments for that. And that's why he's saying, I wish my son had cancer, because at least they could do something. But when you first see that, it's kind of unsettling. It's why am I seeing this? So that's that use of surprise, of mental challenge. Specifically on the topic of visual metaphor. Remember that the requirements for visual story are protagonist and a story problem. Not every image is a visual story. This picture has a visual metaphor. Farm to table. You've got a pitchfork that connects to a piece of silverware, and it's a visual metaphor for farm to table. But there's not really a story, is there? We can infer some information. There must be a farm, there must be a table, but we don't know anything about it, and we don't have a protagonist at all. So this is not a visual story. It's interesting, and it's creative and clever. There's nothing wrong with it. But if we're going for visual stories, this is not it. Just a little bit more. Again, we don't really know much about the protagonists in this case, but look at the metaphor and use of color in this case. That red, that vital red of the blood, of the circulatory system, of the heart. It's a very passionate color. It's a very vital color of life, lifeblood, literally. The tagline is "Guide dogs are vital for the blind," and it takes this in a literal sense. That they share the circulatory system, they share their blood. Their lives are dependent on one another. This one's a little more graphic, and I apologize. Some of the stuff I show, these are all taken from the We Love Ad website. But this one is a visual metaphor, and it takes a very literal interpretation. Does anybody have any interpretation of the comment of what this is about, the subject, and how the visual metaphor works? And Kristen says the government is hiding things. Right. They are. It says the Moroccan government covers up cases of torture. What's the most identifiable symbol of a government? And that would be the government's flag, right? And in this case, the flag literally is covering up this case of this prisoner being tortured. It's taking that in a very allegorical and metaphorical manner. Okay. Any thoughts or questions on visual storytelling and particularly its relevance to what we're doing? Because if you think about what the assignment is for the mood board, you're creating a visual story of your personal mission statement. Odds are you'll be the protagonist, but you don't have to be the protagonist necessarily, depending on your creative direction. Okay, so Thursday is Photoshop practice. This is actually something new I've just added. I didn't used to have formal Photoshop labs, but I thought it would be beneficial to everyone, especially anyone that's new to Photoshop. But what we'll be doing on Thursday is looking at some basic Photoshop techniques, cropping, resizing, adding text, and practice creating visual stories using the ideas that we talked about tonight. And this will tie in directly to your Photoshop practice assignment that you'll turn into me. If you're not new to Photoshop and you've got some skills in that area, feel free to go beyond what's required. Challenge yourself, do something interesting that explores your own ideas. But this is really geared towards the brand new learner that's just getting into Photoshop. So we'll take a look at that on Thursday for our time together. But that was my presentation for tonight, my lecture. I appreciate you guys joining me here. And again, rolling with the time changes that took place, we'll be back to the original time frame next week, I hope. But I'll keep you posted if that should not be the case. If there aren't any questions or any concerns, I'm happy to let you go for the evening. If you did have any questions, let me know and I'll hang out. Thank you very much.